The House votes to approve the Keystone Pipeline, setting up a possible presidential showdown over the energy project. Executive action. The president says he will go it alone on an immigration plan unless Congress acts. The Vatican announces details of the Holy Father's visit to Sri Lanka and the Philippines, his second Asian trip. And for the first time, the National Cathedral in Washington decides to host Friday Islamic prayers. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, November 14th, 2014. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I'm Susanne LaFrankie in for Brian Patrick. Looking at your news now. The Keystone XL Pipeline is a step closer to a presidential showdown. The House passed a bill today supporting the proposed oil pipe. Our Jason Calvi reports from Capitol Hill.
The bill is passed without
in the House today, members voted 252 to 161 in favor of the Keystone Pipeline. Republicans have generally backed the plan, Democrats usually against it.
This is a vote to lower energy costs and create more American jobs.
There's no guarantee that an American will benefit one drop from the oil that will be transported through our turf.
TransCanada first asked to build the project 6 years ago. The Keystone Pipeline would run nearly 900 miles from the Canadian border at Montana to Nebraska. There it would connect with an already operational pipeline running to Gulf Coast refineries, carrying an estimated 830,000 barrels of crude oil each day. Because the project crosses the U.S. border, the White House has to approve and issue a permit for the project. Environmentalists say the project won't help the country or the planet.
There's certainly the possibility that there could be some sort of environmental disaster, such as what you saw with the BP oil spill down in the Gulf, and we have to start looking more towards renewable energy and relying less on fossil fuels.
The president said his decision will be based on the environmental impact of the project. The American Petroleum Institute, who represents the oil and natural gas industry, points to a State Department review already completed.
This is his own State Department that has said there is minimal impact to the environment, but that this pipeline will create 42,000 jobs. It's an easy yes for the president. We have no idea why it's taken this long.
Today is the 9th time the House has voted to approve the pipeline. Now, it's stalled in the Senate, but we are expecting a vote next week where supporters say they'll have the 60 votes to pass it there. Now, this is also affecting the Louisiana runoff, the Senate runoff election, where both candidates there are lead sponsors of Keystone legislation. Suzanne?
Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. President Obama met today with Myanmar's pro-democracy opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi. Obama and the fellow Nobel laureate spoke from the house where she was once under house arrest for 15 years for her democracy activism. President Obama reiterated the country's reform process has been slow and needs work. Military rule is over, and the country held its first multi-party national election in 2012. Both poverty and religious oppression remain.
Our reform process is going through, let's just say, a bumpy patch. But this bumpy patch is something that we can negotiate with commitment and with the help and understanding of our friends from all over the world.
The president now heads to the G20 leaders retreat in Brisbane, Australia. From opposite sides of the world, the president and congressional leaders continue sparring over immigration reform. Obama responded to reporters about possible action the White House could take if lawmakers don't pass a legislative solution soon.
And I indicated to Speaker Boehner several months ago that if, in fact, Congress failed to act, I would use all the lawful authority that I possess to try to make the system work better. And that's going to happen. That's going to happen before the end of the year.
The president has been told over and over and over again, and we're telling him again today, don't do this, because his executive actions are not permanent changes. You know, they won't necessarily be there under the next president.
A senior White House official says executive action on immigration could come as early as next week, but will not happen while the president is overseas. We're joined now by Allison, the Advocacy Director at the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, and Jonathan Keim, a lawyer at the Judicial Crisis Network. To both of you, is this within the President's authority to act without congressional approval? Jonathan?
Well, this administration has a disturbing pattern of ignoring the rule of law. And whether it's rewriting Obamacare because it doesn't like how the statute works and would like to make it work a different way, or whether it's any number of other executive actions that have been taken through a pen and phone sort of mechanism, this administration is ignoring the constitutional separation of powers, which places the power to create laws, to change the law, with Congress and not with the President.
So why is he able to do this? He did something similar with the Dreamers.
The President's previous action with the Dreamers was questionable in a couple of ways, but there are a couple different pieces of it. The first piece was not enforcing the law as written. This would potentially be a problem given that the President would not be taking care that the laws be faithfully executed, which is what the Constitution requires the President to do. However, there's a doctrine called prosecutorial discretion, which the President invoked in imposing the Deferred Action Program. DACA is the name of it, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. And by using prosecutorial discretion in that way, the administration was choosing its strongest constitutional claim. The problem, however, is that what it did with the Dreamers was also issue a variety of authorizations or explicit taking action rather than refusing to take action. And that puts it in a different constitutional category. Okay. The President had no authorization to do that.
Allison, if the President doesn't act, what happens to undocumented immigrants? I mean, there is a major concern there, especially with Catholics. We care about their futures.
Absolutely. This is something that the Catholic bishops have been calling for decades now, is these changes. And families will continue to be separated, and people will continue to struggle and to live in fear if action's not taken. That's why certainly congressional action would be the best option, but we certainly are in need of something right now.
What are you seeing, Allison? I mean, you deal with real people with real lives, with real problems who are undocumented.
Sure. No, that's exactly it. The system is broken. That's what we're seeing, is that the backlogs in the courts, the backlogs in the family system. Someone who petitions for a family member right now may be waiting 20 years, 18, 20 years for their family member. And so I think, again, it's time to act, and we have to keep families together.
Quickly, Jonathan, do you see gridlock ahead with this issue?
I do. Unfortunately, the President had the opportunity several years ago, when his party controlled both houses of Congress, to pass legislation that would deal with this problem. Instead, he put it off and put himself in a position where he's going to have to go around the law, pick a fight with Congress and the American people.
I'm sure we'll be talking to both of you again soon. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. A new report catalogs the Secret Service's lapses when an intruder was able to enter the White House in September. The Internal Review says a command center was not able to talk with agents outside the White House once the breach occurred. Agents in the emergency response team were hesitant about entering the mansion once the intruder was inside the building. Some didn't know the layout and the thick bushes along the fence. The agency thought would stall a jumper didn't. Instead, they were easy to climb through. The jumper, Omar Gonzalez, has pleaded not guilty to his charges. The acting Secret Service director is expected to brief lawmakers in a hearing next week. The Vatican releases the Pope's official schedule for his upcoming trip to Sri Lanka and the Philippines. The Holy Father will be in Colombo from January 12th through the 15th. There he'll canonize Sri Lanka's first saint, Blessed Joseph Vaz. He was a 17th century missionary who revived the Catholic faith in the country. Then the Pope will fly to the Philippines for 5 days. A highlight of that visit includes a visit with survivors of a deadly typhoon. That typhoon left more than 7,000 people dead or missing. When St. John Paul II visited the predominantly Catholic nation in 1995, a crowd of 5 million attended his Mass. A papal record. The faith is growing in Asia. According to the Vatican, the Church baptizes more Catholics every year there than in Europe. The U.S. bishops have elected their delegates for next year's Synod on the Family in Rome. That's according to our news partner, Catholic News Agency. CNA sources say those delegates are Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, Archbishop Charles Chaput, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, and Joseph Jose Gomez. Alternates are Archbishop-designate Blaise Supich and Archbishop Salvatore Gandoli. It's not final yet. Pope Francis has to approve the delegates. The Pentagon says it will invest billions of dollars toward better management of the nation's nuclear arsenal. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel is ordering top-to-bottom changes to fix a nuclear force plagued by sagging morale and years of neglect. Hagel says the Pentagon will spend an extra $10 billion over 5 years to upgrade equipment and overhaul administration. 2 reviews ordered by Hagel found poor oversight and leadership with the weapons programs.
The root cause has been a lack of sustained focus, attention, and resources, resulting in a pervasive sense that a career in the nuclear enterprise offers too few opportunities for growth and advancement.
Hagel ordered the reviews after a string of embarrassing mistakes and mismanagement within the military's nuclear programs when they became public. Coming up, after a Vatican visit, we get the latest from the Archbishop of Erbil, Iraq, on the state of Christians there. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Susanne LaFrankie in for Brian Patrick. A new UN report says Iraqis and their neighbors in Syria are living under a rule of terror by the Islamic State. It paints a terrifying picture of life in areas controlled by the extremists. The report describes widespread violence, including public executions, amputations, and lashings. The Islamic State wants to impose Sharia law in the region. The group's leaders has said in a recording that the U.S. campaign to fight ISIS has failed. His comments come days after he was reported wounded in an airstrike. Joining us now from Rome is Archbishop Bashar Warda of the Archdiocese of Erbil, Iraq. Thank you for joining us, Your Excellency. Can you tell us what life is like for Iraqis right now with the Islamic State?
For the Iraqi Christians, life is very, very difficult. Taking from their past, the present is really frightening. There is an ambiguity about the future. Of course, we are proud of our Christians that they prefer to leave everything and not to leave Christ. So they left their villages, the homes, properties, and reached to Erbil and Duhok safely since the 7th of August. But still, we have to tell, being an immigrant, forced to immigrate and leave your homes, it's really getting very hard, especially with the winter. Winter have approached early this year and made the life of the Christian families very difficult. As you may know, we have 20,000 Christians families being forced to leave their homes, villages, cities.
It's heartbreaking, Your Excellency. Can you tell us why you're in Rome and what kind of support you're getting from the Vatican?
We have to be grateful for the Christians, churches all over the world, because they've responded immediately to the crisis. Here in Rome, the Pope was always talking and still speaking about the difficulties that the Christians are facing in the Middle East, especially in Iraq. He was willing at certain point to come. So this kind of support is needed. And I'm here to tell the bishops, because we had a chance to speak to them in Assisi, to say thank you for their support, and to ask them and all other Christians to continue to speak out on behalf of Christians in the Middle East and in Iraq, and to make the voice louder. As you may know, if you stop shouting for us, nobody is going to take care of what's happening there.
Your Excellency, can you tell us how Christians in the U.S. can help Christians in Iraq?
To follow up, to raise awareness, to pray for the Christians. That's very important. Being persecuted and forgotten is a terrible feeling. Being persecuted and remembered really would give us hope, strength to continue carrying this cross. And at the same time, we are grateful that we have received so much help from our people, Christian community, Chaldean community, Christians in U.S. For different types of help, financial, materials. this is really showing how we could live the gospel of solidarity. So I urge you, Christians and Catholics in the United States, please do not forget us. Speak whenever you have the chance to speak about what's happening, because Christians in Middle East and in Iraq are really facing a very difficult time.
They certainly are, and of course our prayers from Rome. Archbishop Bashar Warda of the Archdiocese of Erbil, Iraq. Thank you for joining us, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
It's being called a dramatic moment in Muslim-Christian relations. For the first time in its history, the National Cathedral in Washington hosted Muslim Friday prayers. Our Wyatt Goolsby was there.
It's a historic Episcopalian cathedral that has held state funerals and welcomed politicians and presidents. But the traditional choir music was set aside for another sound today, the Muslim call to prayer. Today, the cathedral welcomed several Muslim groups for their Friday prayers. Organizers say they want to foster more understanding and acceptance between Christians and Muslims. Gina Gillen Campbell, who oversees all Episcopalian services in the cathedral, says the event is about 1 year in the making.
We have talked about what would it be like to have Muslim prayer in this space? Where would that be? Would it be comfortable? Would it be welcome? And would that take the cathedral's stated sort of identity of a house of prayer for all people to another level?
Prayers are being offered in the north transept. It's an area of the cathedral with arches and limited iconography that cathedral officials call it almost mosque-like, with an appropriate orientation as well, in this case where Muslims pray facing east.
Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior.
Not everyone agrees with the cathedral's hosting non-Christian prayers. Muslims we spoke with say the event is a sign of respect.
It is important for us to stand together, and we can't allow things that are happening overseas, for example, ISIS. If we don't stand together, in the end, ISIS wins. So we have to show them that they're not going to break us apart. We're going to stay united as Americans.
Construction of the National Cathedral began in 1907. Since then, it's been used for a variety of religious and cultural events. In Washington, Wyatt Goolsby, EWTN News Nightly.
A post-election survey says a majority of Americans think the country is on the wrong track. The study from the Public Religion Institute shows anxiety about terrorism and Ebola influenced the midterm election. But ultimately, it was the people who stayed home and those who voted against the party in power who decided the election. Voters' specific interests swayed their decisions. 65% of those whose top concern was health care voted for a Democrat. 50% whose top priority was the economy voted for a Democrat. 43% of those voted Republican. By contrast, 62% of those whose top concern was immigration voted Republican, and 65% who cared most about national security also voted Republican. Earlier this week, Brian Patrick interviewed a political scientist to find out more.
Melissa Deckman is chair of the Political Science Department at Washington College and an affiliated scholar at the Public Religion Research Institute, which conducted this survey. Melissa, what do you make of the findings? I'm curious especially why those who make the economy a priority voted Democrat.
Well, I think voters had a range of issues they were concerned about. So those that cared about the economy tended to vote for the Democratic Party because I think that their policies are more in line with what they believe. So, for example, Democratic voters are more supportive of increasing the minimum wage. They're more supportive, I think, of having government put regulations on companies for family leave, those sorts of policies. And I think it resonated more with Democratic voters. For Republicans, I think their concerns were elsewhere. It was national security. It was really also a referendum on the president. And so the president is very unpopular with Republican voters, and that's really what drove their vote, I think.
The numbers show the economy is improving. Is there a disconnect between the economy improving and how voters see it?
Absolutely. Even though the rate of joblessness has gone down in the past couple of years, and there have been more jobs created in the economy, what's happened is essentially that wage growth is stagnant. And so I think people's individual perceptions of the economy improving hasn't really filtered down to their level. So a lot of people really still believe there's a recession happening.
What about world events? How much did they influence voters?
I think they played a big role in this election. Unfortunately for the Democrats and for President Obama, threats from ISIS and Ebola really sort of dominated the headlines in the past couple of months. And I think the Republicans really made a point to emphasize that the Obama administration and Democrats in Congress weren't up to the task of handling this job.
Your survey also looked at religious voters. Let's look specifically too at the Catholic vote. How did they vote? What motivated them?
Well, the Catholic vote is always a bellwether for American politics. In recent presidential election years, when Catholics go, where the Catholic vote goes is where the election victor is. And so in this year, the Catholic vote was evenly split, half and half. However, if you peel back the data a little bit, white Catholic voters tended to go with the Republican Party, and Latino voters tended to side with the Democratic Party. I think where you saw an overall even split among Catholics really benefited the Republicans because Latino Catholics tended to stay home this election cycle. Voter turnout among Latinos was dramatically lower than it was in 2012, and I think it really hurt the Democratic Party.
So a lot of the results of this election came down to the people who didn't vote.
Absolutely. There were huge issues with turnout when it came to not just Hispanics, but also to millennials. Millennials largely sat out this election, and they were a large part of the Democratic coalition in 2012 and in 2008.
All right, Melissa Deckman is joining us tonight. We appreciate your insight into this survey by the organization that you're with, the Public Religion Research Institute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Catholics speak out against vaccines in Kenya. Ethics expert Dr. Kevin Donovan weighs in. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Susanne LaFrankie. In Kenya, Catholic bishops are speaking out against a tetanus vaccination campaign they believe is being falsely promoted. In a statement, the church leaders assure the Catholic Church is not opposed to regular vaccines administered in Kenya. But they continue to call on citizens to avoid the vaccines because they're convinced it is indeed a disguised population control program. Dr. Kevin Donovan is the director of Georgetown University's Center for Clinical Bioethics. Are the bishops' concerns valid?
Actually, the bishops have concerns about only one vaccine, and that is a tetanus vaccine that is being used in unusual ways compared to what they would have expected. Normally, vaccines are given one time with repeats. These have been focused entirely on fertile females. They were concerned because there were reports that it was laced with a hormone called human gonadotrophin, chorionic gonadotrophin, sorry.
That's okay.
And the problem is that there was once a vaccine trial to use that combination as a sterilization technique.
How should these international groups like the World Health Organization and UNICEF respond?
The biggest problem is that they didn't respond at all. The bishops asked about this in March. They asked about it again last October. They asked to have these vaccines tested to make sure they weren't contaminated. They finally sent it off and did their own testing. They found small levels of HCG in the vaccine. But the problem was they were probably getting them tested at the wrong labs.
Okay, so what's your take on this? Is it an effort, a stealth effort to sterilize in third world countries?
I mean, to think that would make it unconscionable. But unfortunately, given the West's attitudes towards Africa and other developed countries, it may not be unthinkable. In fact, I think what we're talking about is trace contaminants, not likely, bad testing, more likely, and probably a safe vaccine. And if WHO and the Kenyan health ministries had agreed to test it, they probably could have resolved this a long time ago, but they haven't.
So just quickly, what would you like to see happen?
Test the vaccines, prove that there's no contaminant, no HCG, no risk to the people, and I think that then the bishops would say green light.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Welcome.
Okay, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Susanne LaFrankie. Thanks for watching tonight. Good night, and God bless.